I remember the day like it just happened yesterday. It started out like any other normal morning. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and I was running late for work, as usual. I rushed through breakfast, grabbed my bag, and shouted, "Bye, Mom. Love you." She smiled from the kitchen, like always, and said, "Love you too, sweetheart." It was such a normal day. Nothing felt strange. Nothing at all. If someone had told me that by nightfall, everything I believed about my life would change, I would have laughed. But that's the thing about life, it never warns you before it breaks your heart. It all started because of something small. A game, really. A friend from work was talking about one of those DNA test kits. You know, the ones that tell you about your family roots, your ancestry, and where you come from. Everyone in the office had been trying it out. People were finding out funny stories about their great-grandparents or discovering cousins in other countries. I didn't think much of it. But when my friend handed me an extra kit she'd gotten on sale and said, "You should try it." It's fun, I thought, why not? It was supposed to be just for fun. I went home that evening, opened the small white box, followed the instructions, and mailed it off. I didn't even tell my parents. It didn't seem important. Weeks passed. I almost forgot about it. Then one afternoon, I got an email saying my results were ready. I was sitting in my room, eating chips and scrolling through my phone when I clicked on the message. It said, "Your DNA results are in. Click to view your ancestry and relatives." I clicked the link, expecting to see something like 40% West African, 30% British, or something random. But what I saw made my heart drop. It said, "Possible biological relatives found." There was a name. A woman's name. And underneath it, in bold letters, it read, "Parent/child match." I froze. I read it again and again. My chest felt tight. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Parent/child match. That couldn't be right. My mother was downstairs, cooking dinner. My father was watching the evening news. Everything was normal. How could there be another parent in the picture? At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the system got it wrong. So, I refreshed the page. The same name appeared. And then I noticed something else. There was an address listed under the name. A town I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were shaking. Then I heard my mom's voice downstairs, "Dinner's ready." I looked at the screen again, then at the door. Something inside me told me not to say anything yet. Not until I was sure. So, I closed my laptop and went downstairs like nothing had happened. At dinner, I tried to act normal. My mom asked about my day. My dad told one of his usual jokes. I laughed, but it felt forced. My spoon shook a little as I picked at my rice. Mom noticed. "You okay, sweetheart? You look pale." "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just tired." She smiled and patted my hand. "You work too hard. Get some rest tonight." I nodded. But my mind wasn't at the table. It was still staring at that name. That strange name that said, "Parent/child match." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it. I wanted to talk to someone, but who? I didn't want to hurt my parents. What if it meant nothing? What if it caused problems for no reason? But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the thought grew in my head. So, I decided to look around the house. Maybe I'd find something that could explain it. Something that would prove the DNA site was wrong. I started in the study. Dad kept all his papers neatly filed. I opened the drawer where he kept family documents, birth certificates, school records, things like that. When I saw the envelope marked with my name, my heart skipped. Inside was my birth certificate. But something didn't look right. The ink looked faded, and the edges were worn, like it had been handled many times. I looked closer. And that's when I saw it. In the space where it said, "Mother's name," the handwriting didn't match. It looked like it had been changed. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that paper. My hands felt cold. My eyes burned, but no tears came. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" It was Mom. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was nervous. I quickly folded the paper and tried to smile. Just, looking through some old stuff. She looked at my hands. Then at the drawer. Then at me. Her face changed, just for a second, but I saw it. Fear. I had never seen that look on her face before. "Is there something you want to ask me?" she said softly. My throat went dry. I wanted to say no, to pretend nothing was wrong. But instead, I whispered, "Mom, is there something you haven't told me?" She froze. The air felt heavy. Then she said, "Why would you ask that?" I didn't answer. I just handed her the paper. She looked at it, then sighed. I could see her hands shaking. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "In Dad's drawer," I said. "Mom, who is this woman?" For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she sat down beside me. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "there are things we wanted to tell you when the time was right." My heart pounded. "Tell me what?" Before she could answer, Dad walked in. He looked from me to Mom, then at the paper in her hand. His face went pale. He sat down slowly and said, "I think it's time." I didn't know what he meant. I just stared at both of them, waiting. That's when Mom opened her mouth, her eyes full of tears, and said, "We're not your biological parents." Everything around me went quiet. I could hear the clock ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own breathing. But inside me, everything shattered. I wanted to speak, but no words came out. My chest hurt, and I felt dizzy. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "You mean I'm adopted?" I finally whispered. She nodded, crying. "Yes. We adopted you when you were just a baby." I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Betrayal? It all mixed together, and I just sat there, staring at the floor. After a long silence, I said, "Who is she?" "The woman on the DNA site." Mom looked at Dad, then back at me. "She's your birth mother," she said softly. "And it seems, she's been looking for you." I froze again. My head spun. I didn't know what to do or what to think. All I knew was that everything I believed about my life, my family, my story, myself, had just changed. When I opened the envelope again and looked at the name and address on that screen, I realized something deep inside me had shifted. I looked up at Mom. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that night felt like living in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The walls of our house, the smell of Mom's cooking, even the sound of Dad's laughter, they all felt strange now, like they belonged to someone else's life. I still woke up in the same bed, in the same room, but my world had changed completely. At breakfast the next morning, no one said much. The clinking of spoons and plates was the only sound. Mom tried to smile. "You should eat something," she said softly. I nodded but couldn't swallow a bite. My stomach felt tight. Finally, I asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her spoon stopped in midair. Dad sighed. "We wanted to," he said. "We just didn't know how." I looked at both of them. "So, you thought lying to me was better?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We weren't lying to hurt you. We wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked. "From knowing who I really am?" No one answered. The silence hurt more than the truth. That night, I went to my room and cried for hours. I thought about all the times Mom told me, "You have my eyes," or "You got that from your father." Were those lies too? Every memory now had a question mark beside it. The next day, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I went to Mom while she was folding laundry and said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning." She sat down, her hands trembling. "We found out we couldn't have children," she began. It broke me. I wanted a baby so badly. Then one day, a woman came into my life. She was young and scared. She was pregnant but couldn't keep the baby. That baby was you. I listened quietly, my heart racing. "So, she just gave me away?" I asked. Mom shook her head. "She loved you. She wanted you to have a better life. We promised to love you like our own." I stood up. "And you did." But you also lied. Her eyes filled with tears. I did it because I loved you. Because I was afraid of losing you. But you did lose me, I whispered. At least the part that trusted you. Dad tried to calm things down, but I couldn't stop the anger building inside me. I had a right to know. I shouted. I know, he said quietly. We made a mistake. We thought keeping it secret would make things easier. For who? I snapped. You? Because it sure didn't make my life easier now. He didn't answer. That night, I went through the documents again. I found letters, old ones, folded neatly in an envelope. They were from my birth mother. The first one said, Dear Mr. and Mrs. James, I hope you and the baby are doing well. Please tell her I love her. Maybe one day, when she's older, you can tell her the truth. Anna. My hands shook as I read her name. Anna. That was my birth mother's name. I sat there for a long time, staring at her handwriting. It was real. She was real. The next day, I asked Mom about the letters. Her face turned pale. Where did you find those? She asked. In your drawer, I said. Were you ever planning to tell me about them? She sighed. I kept them because I wasn't ready to let go. I was scared that if you knew her name, you'd want to leave. I looked straight at her. And what if I do? Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then I'd still love you. But it would break my heart. A few days later, I decided to search for Anna online. I typed her full name and the town listed on the DNA site. After scrolling for hours, I found a small photo from a local news page, a woman who looked like me. Same eyes. Same smile. It felt strange, seeing a face that looked like mine but wasn't part of the life I knew. I printed the photo and kept it in my drawer. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in the dark anymore. The tension at home got worse. Mom cried often. Dad stayed quiet, like he didn't know what to say anymore. Even relatives started calling more, whispering things they thought I couldn't hear. One afternoon, Aunt Mary came to visit. She hugged me tightly and said, We always wanted to tell you, sweetheart. But your mom, she couldn't. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated. It's not my place to say. Just know she's been through a lot. That made me even more curious. What else was I not being told? I started noticing little things, like how Mom would hang up the phone quickly when I entered the room. Or how Dad would whisper with Aunt Mary on the porch late at night. Once, I heard my name. I stopped by the door and listened. Aunt Mary said, She's going to find out eventually. Dad sighed. If she ever finds out the truth, it'll destroy everything. My heart dropped. The truth? I thought I already knew the truth. What else could there be? I quietly walked back to my room, my mind spinning. What could they be hiding now? The next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I confronted them. What truth are you hiding? I demanded. Dad looked shocked. You were listening? Yes. I heard you. What are you not telling me? He rubbed his forehead and said, It's complicated. Try me, I said firmly. Mom started crying again. There are some things about your birth father, things we didn't want you to know. My heart skipped. My birth father? She nodded slowly. He wasn't part of your life. We thought keeping it that way was best. Why? I asked. What did he do? Mom looked away. It's not what he did. It's who he was. I felt my stomach twist. Who was he, Mom? She hesitated for a long time before whispering, He was someone your birth mother wanted to forget. Someone from her past. I didn't understand. Was he a bad person? Dad interrupted, That's enough for now. No. I shouted. You don't get to decide what I can know anymore. They both stared at me in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what the truth really was. Was my birth father still alive? Did he know about me? Was there something dangerous about him? Every question made me feel more lost. I picked up the printed photo of my birth mother again. Who are you? I whispered. And what are they hiding? Tears filled my eyes as I looked at her smile. I didn't know if I wanted to meet her or if I was too afraid to. But one thing was certain, I couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. Because the moment I heard Dad's whisper that night, if she ever finds out the truth, it'll destroy everything, I knew that whatever everything was, it was already falling apart. When the truth finally came out, it didn't happen in one big explosion. It came quietly, like a slow wave that starts small but ends up knocking you down. It was a Saturday morning. I woke up early because I couldn't sleep again. For days, my mind had been spinning with questions. Every sound in the house made me jump. I couldn't eat, I couldn't focus. All I wanted was the truth. That day, Mom came into my room holding a brown envelope. Her hands were shaking. I could see it in her face, something was about to change forever. She sat on the edge of my bed and said softly, "I think it's time you knew everything." My heart started pounding. I didn't say anything. I just watched her open the envelope. Inside were some papers, old, yellow at the edges, and a photo. "This," she said, her voice breaking, "is your birth certificate." I reached out and took it with trembling hands. The paper felt cold, like it didn't belong to me. When I looked at the names, my stomach turned. Under Mother, it didn't say Anna. It said Rebecca James. Rebecca. My adoptive mother's name. For a moment, I thought I was seeing it wrong. I blinked, looked again, and read it out loud. "Rebecca James, that's you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I froze. What does this mean? She couldn't speak for a few seconds. Then she whispered, "It means I am your birth mother." I felt like the air left the room. I stared at her, trying to understand what she had just said. "What?" I whispered. You're my birth mother?" She nodded again. "Yes. I was 17 when I had you." Everything around me went quiet. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to stop. I sat there, not breathing, my mind racing through every memory, every birthday, every bedtime story, every hug. All of it suddenly looked different now. I could barely speak. "So, all these years, you pretended to adopt me? You lied about being my real mom?" Her face twisted in pain. "I didn't pretend. I really did adopt you, but it was a way to keep you safe." I didn't understand. Safe from what? She wiped her tears. From shame. From gossip. From my past. Then she told me the truth. When she was 17, she got pregnant. The father, my father, was her older sister's fiancé. My chest tightened as soon as I heard that. "What?" I whispered. "You mean Aunt Mary's fiancé?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. It was a mistake, a terrible one. We were young, and it happened once. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought my life was over." I covered my mouth, trying not to cry. She continued, her voice trembling. "Your grandmother was furious. She didn't want anyone to know. So, we made a plan. I would leave town for a while. When I came back, your father and I would tell people we adopted you. So everyone thought you adopted me, but you didn't," I said softly. "No," she said. "You're mine. You always were." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I called Mom my whole life was actually my real mother. And Aunt Mary, the woman who helped raise me, who gave me gifts and hugged me at every holiday, she wasn't just my aunt. She was the woman whose life was ruined by the truth of how I was born. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands, my voice, everything. "So, you and Aunt Mary." "She never forgave me," Mom said quietly. "She broke off the engagement and moved away. She promised never to tell anyone, and I promised to keep you safe." Tears ran down my face. "You could have told me," I said. "I would have understood." She shook her head. "No, you wouldn't. You were a child. I wanted you to grow up loved, not judged. But I grew up lied to," I said, my voice breaking. She started crying harder. "I know. And I hate myself for it every day." Just then, Dad came into the room. His face looked pale, like he had been standing outside the door listening. He sat beside Mom and said, "I knew everything. From the day we met. I married her knowing she had you. I loved you both anyway. I looked at him, trying to hold back tears. So you're not my real dad? He shook his head gently. Not by blood. But in every other way, yes, I am. That broke me. I started crying too. You should have told me, I said. Both of you. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You had so many chances, I said. When I was a teenager. When I asked why we never talked about your past. Why didn't you just tell me then? Her voice cracked. Because I didn't want you to hate me. I whispered, I don't hate you. I just don't know who you are anymore. Hours passed. We sat in silence. My mind replayed every moment of my life, all the family gatherings, all the secrets that must have been whispered behind my back. Then I thought of Aunt Mary. All those times she looked at me a little too long, all those awkward pauses when people mentioned my name. It all made sense now. I asked Mom quietly, does she know that I know? No, she said. She moved away to another city years ago. We don't talk much anymore. I nodded slowly. I think I need to see her. Mom looked frightened. She might not want to talk about it. I still have to try, I said. She deserves to hear it from me. That night, I went back to my room and sat on the floor with the papers spread out around me, the birth certificate, the photo, the letters. I ran my fingers over the paper and felt my hands shaking again. The truth was right there in front of me, in black and white. My whole life, I thought I was living one story. But really, I was living another. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Everything I believed about my family, my identity, my past, it all felt upside down. I didn't know if I should be angry or grateful, sad or relieved. Because yes, they lied to me. But they also gave me love. Still, the truth hurt in a way I didn't know was possible. I looked at the photo of my mom, the young version of her, smiling and holding me as a baby. She was just a scared 17-year-old girl who made a mistake, one that followed her for the rest of her life. And somehow, I was the result of that mistake, but also the reason she kept fighting. As I folded the papers back into the envelope, I whispered to myself, it turns out my adoptive parents weren't lying. They were hiding. And now I have to decide what to do with that truth. After that day, nothing in our house felt the same again. The next morning, the silence was loud. You could hear every clock tick, every creak in the floor. No one spoke much. We were all just, existing in the same space but living in different worlds. Mom stayed in her room most of the day. I could hear her crying sometimes, quietly, like she didn't want me to know. Dad sat in the living room with the TV on but the sound turned low, staring at nothing. I think he was trying to give me space, but really, he just didn't know what to say either. And me? I just kept replaying everything in my mind, the papers, her face, the truth. It felt like my whole life had cracked open, and I couldn't put the pieces back together. A few days later, I decided I couldn't hold it in anymore. I went downstairs, into the living room where both of them were sitting. The light was dim, and the air felt heavy. My voice shook when I spoke. You kept me from knowing who I was, I said. Mom looked up slowly, her eyes red and swollen. Dad shifted in his chair, like he wanted to speak but didn't know where to start. I grew up believing one story, I said again, louder this time. And all this time, you both knew the truth. You knew I was living a lie. Mom covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry? I said, my chest tightening. That's all? You had years to tell me. You watched me ask questions. You watched me wonder why Aunt Mary looked at me funny. You just let me keep believing. Dad sighed deeply. We thought we were protecting you. I shook my head. No. You were protecting yourselves. The room went quiet. No one moved. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Then Mom spoke, her voice low but clear. Your aunt knows now that you found out. She called this morning. I froze. What did she say? She wants to see you, Mom said. She says it's time you hear her side. I didn't even know what to feel, fear, anger, curiosity, maybe all at once. But part of me needed that. I needed to look her in the eye. The next day, I went to Aunt Mary's house. I hadn't seen her in years, not since I was in college. She looked older, tired, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long. When she opened the door, she didn't smile. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." We sat at her kitchen table. The smell of tea filled the room. She stared at her cup for a long time before she finally spoke. "I should have told you," she said quietly. "But I couldn't." I swallowed hard. "You knew I was your sister's daughter?" She nodded. "Yes. I knew from the start. I was there when she came back from that small town with you in her arms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone. But your grandmother made me promise." "Promise what?" I asked. "To protect your mother's secret," she said. "She said the family couldn't take another scandal." I hated her for it. But I stayed quiet. Her voice broke when she said that. Tears filled her eyes. "I tried to move on," she said. "I got married, moved away, had my own kids. But every time I saw you, birthdays, holidays, graduations, I remembered everything I lost." I could feel my throat closing up. "You mean Uncle James?" I asked. She nodded, her tears falling now. "He left me after he found out about the pregnancy. I never blamed you for that, but I couldn't look at you without remembering." I sat there, speechless. For years, I had loved her like my aunt. But now I saw it, the pain behind her smiles, the distance in her hugs. "I thought you hated me," I said softly. She shook her head. "Never. I just didn't know how to love you without breaking." When I got home that night, Mom was waiting by the window. "She told you, didn't she?" she asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "She told me everything." Mom nodded, her eyes wet again. "I've wanted to tell you for so long. Every time you asked about family history, or why you didn't look like us, I wanted to say it. But I was scared." I sat down across from her. "Scared of losing me?" She nodded slowly. "You were the only good thing that came out of a terrible time. I couldn't stand the thought of you looking at me differently." I looked down at my hands. "But I do look at you differently now." That made her start crying again. Dad came in then, standing in the doorway. "We've all made mistakes," he said. "But what matters is what we do now." For days after that, the house was filled with awkward silence and heavy hearts. We tried to talk, but the words always came out broken. I spent a lot of nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who I really was. Was I the child of a mistake? Or was I just a daughter who had been loved the wrong way? I started going through old family photos again. I noticed small things, how my aunt's eyes looked like mine, how my mom avoided cameras back then. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. Every picture felt like a secret frozen in time. Then, one evening, there was another knock on the door. It was Aunt Mary again. She came in quietly and handed my mom an old photo album. "I don't want to carry this anymore," she said. Mom took it carefully, her hands shaking. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Aunt Mary said. "It's time we stop pretending." They hugged, for the first time in decades, I think. Both of them crying, both saying, "I'm sorry," over and over. I stood there watching, and for a moment, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt tired, tired of secrets, tired of pain, tired of trying to fit all the pieces together. Later that night, I went to my room. It looked the same, the posters, the books, the bed. But it didn't feel the same. I sat by the door and just stared at everything I once thought I knew. The walls that held my childhood stories. The pictures that once made me smile. The family that was now full of cracks. I realized then that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays when everything falls apart. And even though the truth hurt, even though I felt betrayed, I still saw love, messy, broken love, in all of it. As I stood by the door of my childhood room, I whispered to myself, sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when the truth breaks you. It has been weeks since the truth came out, but it still feels fresh sometimes, like a wound that's healing slowly. Every day, I wake up trying to remember who I am now. Not who I was told I was, but who I've always been deep inside. At first, the days were heavy. There were phone calls, long talks, and awkward silences. Relatives called to check in, asking questions they didn't really want the answers to. Some took sides. Some just stayed away. I understood, it was easier for them not to get involved. Mom tried to reach out every morning, asking how I felt, if I'd eaten, if I wanted to talk. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes, I just nodded. Other times, I walked away. Dad gave me space. He would knock on my door before bed, say good night, and leave quietly. It was his way of saying he still cared. Then one day, a letter came in the mail. It was from a lawyer. It said something about birth records, documents, and my right to access them now that the truth was out. For a moment, I froze. Legal papers always sounded serious, like something that could change things again. I read every line slowly. It talked about inheritance rights, medical information, and what it meant to officially know your birth parents. I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want to fight anyone. I just wanted peace. But I also knew I couldn't ignore what was rightfully mine, not for money, but for understanding. So, I called the lawyer back. We talked. He said I could decide how far I wanted to go. I told him, I'll take what I need to know, nothing more. That was the first time I felt in control again. After that, I decided I needed help sorting my feelings. I started seeing a therapist. She was kind, gentle, and didn't judge me. The first few sessions were hard. I cried a lot. Sometimes I just sat there in silence. She told me something that stuck with me: you can't change the story that brought you here. But you can choose how it ends. Those words gave me hope. We talked about forgiveness, not the kind where everything suddenly feels better, but the kind where you stop letting the pain control you. She said healing isn't fast. It's like learning to walk again after falling. You wobble at first, but each step matters. I also started talking to my friends again. For weeks, I had avoided them. I didn't know how to explain everything. But when I finally did, they just listened. No judgment. No fake comfort. Just presence. One of them said, "You're still you. Nothing changes that." That simple sentence meant more to me than they knew. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, not as the adopted daughter or the secret child, but as me. I started drawing again, something I used to love when I was younger. It helped me express what words couldn't. I also began journaling, writing down my thoughts, my memories, my hopes. It became my way of healing on paper. A few weeks later, I made a decision that took all my courage. I wanted to see my birth mother. It wasn't about blame. It was about closure. Mom, my adoptive mom, was nervous but didn't stop me. She just said, "Do what your heart needs." The day I went, my hands were shaking the whole drive there. The house was small, with white walls and a garden full of flowers. When she opened the door, I could see the years in her eyes, sadness, guilt, and love all at once. We stood there in silence for a few seconds before I said, "Hi." She nodded slowly, tears already filling her eyes. "Hi." We sat at her kitchen table, just like I did with Aunt Mary weeks ago. The smell of food on the stove filled the air. It was quiet except for the sound of a clock ticking on the wall. She said softly, "I never stopped thinking about you." I looked at her face, her hands, the way she spoke. There was something familiar about her, like looking at a reflection I had never seen before. "I told you I forgive you," I said, my voice shaking a little. Not because I understand everything, but because I need to move forward. She started crying quietly, and I reached across the table and held her hand. It was the first time in years that I felt something close to peace. We talked for hours. She told me about the past, how she was young, scared, and alone. She said giving me away wasn't out of hate, it was out of fear. She thought I would have a better life. I didn't know how to respond, but I knew one thing: I didn't want to live the rest of my life holding on to anger. After that day, something inside me changed. I didn't have all the answers, but I finally had closure. I went back home and sat with Mom and Dad. I told them about the visit. Mom cried again, but this time, it felt different, softer, not filled with guilt. "I'm glad you went," she said. "You deserved that." I nodded. I did. And I'm okay. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. No nightmares. No racing thoughts. Just quiet. Weeks passed. Life slowly found its rhythm again. I started focusing on my future, my studies, my career, my dreams. I even began volunteering at a local center for adopted children, helping them talk about their feelings. When I looked at those kids, I saw myself in them, scared, curious, and full of questions. I told them, it's okay to not have all the answers. You're still whole. And every time I said it, I believed it a little more for myself too. Months later, I drove back to the small park near where I first met my birth mother. It had a wooden bench facing a quiet lake. I sat there, watching the water move gently under the sun. I thought about everything, the lies, the truth, the pain, and the healing. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. I whispered to the wind, thank you, for giving me the strength to keep going. I still visit that place sometimes. Not because I need approval, not because I'm looking for answers, but because it reminds me how far I've come. It reminds me that family isn't always chosen, but love can be rebuilt. It reminds me that truth can hurt, but it can also set you free. Months later, I still visit the place where I first met my birth mother. Not because I needed approval, but because I needed closure. I never saw this coming. One day, I was just living my normal life, going to work, chatting with my mom, planning my weekend like always. Then, everything changed with one conversation. My name is Sarah. I grew up believing I was the daughter of a loving mom and dad, and honestly, I never had a reason to question it. They gave me everything, love, care, and a sense of belonging. But one evening, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking, her eyes full of something I couldn't understand at first, fear, guilt, maybe both. Then she said words that would change my life forever. Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. You were adopted. I didn't know what to say. My world stopped. Everything I believed about who I was, my family, my childhood, my identity, suddenly felt like a story someone else had written for me. And that was just the beginning. Because what came after, the truth about my real parents, shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. My mom told me I was adopted. But the truth about my real parents shattered my world. My name is Sarah, and for most of my life, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the only child of my parents, Linda and Mark. We lived in a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone. Our house wasn't big, but it was warm, the kind of place that smelled like fresh bread on Sundays and sounded like laughter on Saturday mornings. My mom, Linda, was gentle. She had this way of making everything feel okay, no matter what. When I scraped my knee as a kid, she'd kiss it and say, "You're strong, just like your dad." My dad, Mark, was steady. He didn't talk much, but his presence was enough. If Mom was the heart of our home, Dad was the anchor. Growing up, I had a pretty normal childhood. I went to the same school from kindergarten all the way to high school. Every year, my parents came to my school events, Mom with her camera, Dad with that proud smile he only gave when he thought I wasn't looking. Birthdays were a big deal. Mom would bake a cake herself, even though it never looked perfect, and Dad would hang up balloons that always drooped after a few hours. But to me, it was perfect. We didn't have much money, but we had moments, family holidays, road trips, Christmas mornings in matching pajamas. I still remember the time we went camping when I was 9. It rained the entire weekend, but Mom refused to let that ruin it. We ended up roasting marshmallows under the car trunk door, laughing every time the wind blew smoke into our faces. Those were the kinds of memories that built my world, simple, safe, and filled with love. As I got older, I started to notice little things, nothing that made sense back then. Like the way my mom's face would tighten whenever someone asked who I looked like. People used to say, "Sarah, you have such unique features, your eyes are different." Mom would smile, but it always looked forced. Or how every year at family reunions, she'd pull me close whenever certain relatives came around, like she didn't want me to wander too far. When I was about 13, I found an old photo album in the attic. It was dusty, filled with baby pictures, or at least, I thought they were mine. But there was something off. In the earliest photos, I looked slightly different, almost like it wasn't me at all. The baby's hair was lighter, the eyes a bit wider. I showed it to Mom, excited, and said, "Wow, I looked so different as a baby." She froze for a second, just one, and then smiled too quickly. "Oh, babies change so much, sweetheart. You were just chubbier back then." Then she took the album from my hands and said she'd put it away. I didn't think much of it then, but I remember the sound of her voice. It shook a little. My dad never talked much about when I was born. Whenever I asked, he'd just say, "You came into our lives like a blessing." I thought it was his way of being poetic. He wasn't good with words, but he loved deeply. He'd tuck me in every night until I was too old for it. I never doubted that I was his daughter. In high school, I started to notice how I didn't really resemble either of them. My skin tone was a bit darker than Mom's, and my hair had a texture that didn't match hers. Friends would point it out sometimes, saying, "You sure you didn't get switched at birth?" We'd laugh, but deep down, something in me would twist, a small, quiet question that never really went away. I remember one Christmas when I was 16. My grandmother on Mom's side was visiting. She was a sweet old woman, but that year, she seemed more serious than usual. We were looking at family photos when she sighed and said, "Some stories are better left untold." I asked her what she meant, but Mom quickly changed the subject. They both laughed it off, but that night, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. I couldn't hear the words clearly, only the tone. It was tense, like something heavy hung between them. After that, little moments began to pile up. Once, when I was sick, I overheard Mom on the phone with someone, saying, "She can't find out." Not now. When I asked her about it later, she said she was talking about a work issue. I believed her, or maybe I wanted to. There was also that time in college when I needed my birth certificate for an application. Mom said she'd handle it, but when I asked to see it, she told me it got misplaced. "I'll get a new copy," she promised, but she never did. At the time, I thought she was just busy. Now, I'm not so sure. Despite the small oddities, life went on. We still had family dinners every Sunday. Dad still called me kiddo. Mom still texted me every morning just to say, "Good day, my sunshine." I never imagined that beneath all that love, there was a secret waiting to break everything open. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there, the nervous smiles, the quick topic changes, the missing photos. I just chose not to see them. Because when you love someone deeply, you don't look for cracks in the picture. You just believe the story you've been told. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth has a way of finding you, even when you're not ready for it. When I think about my parents, Linda and Mark, I always imagine them the way they looked in their wedding photo. Mom was glowing, holding a bunch of white roses. Dad had this proud, almost shy smile. I used to stare at that picture all the time growing up. I'd think, that's love. That's the kind of love I want someday. Mom once told me that she and Dad met at a community event. She was helping organize a fundraiser for the local hospital, and he came to fix one of the broken sound systems. She said he barely said a word to her at first, but a week later, he showed up at her office with coffee and a note that said, "You forgot your smile yesterday." I brought it back. That became their little story. Mom told it every anniversary. They got married young, early 20s. But the part Mom never shared much about was the years that followed. I found out later, through whispers from my aunt, that Mom had a hard time having children. She had 2 miscarriages before I came along. At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. I just knew she held me tighter than most moms did. When I was a kid, she'd always say, "You're our miracle." I used to love hearing it. I'd smile and say, "I know, Mom." She'd laugh and hug me even tighter. But as I got older, the word miracle started to sound strange. Like it carried a story I didn't fully understand. Our home was quiet but full of small traditions. Every Friday night, we'd have pizza and watch old movies. Every Sunday morning, Dad would make pancakes, always too many, and Mom would tell me not to eat too fast. I had everything a child could ask for. Love. Safety. A family that cared. Still, there were small cracks I didn't notice until later. Like how my parents never talked about the day I was born. Other kids would share their birth stories, how their mom went into labor or how their dad fainted in the delivery room. When I asked about mine, Mom would smile and say, "Oh, it was a long night. But worth it." And that was it. No funny stories. No photos from the hospital. Just silence. Sometimes, my dad would look at me with this deep, almost sad expression. I didn't understand it. I'd ask, "What's wrong, Dad?" And he'd say, "Nothing, kiddo. Just thinking about how fast you're growing." But now I wonder what he was really thinking. When I was 10, I overheard Mom talking on the phone late at night. Her voice was soft, shaky. She said something like, "I don't know how to tell her. She's so happy. I don't want to ruin that." I remember lying in bed, pretending to sleep, wondering what she meant. I thought maybe they were planning to move or that Dad lost his job. I had no idea she was talking about something much bigger. My parents never argued much, but every once in a while, I'd hear raised voices from their bedroom. Words like truth and when the time is right. Mom always said grown-ups just have stressful days. So I believed her. At school, I never felt like I didn't belong, but sometimes, when people commented on how different I looked, I'd come home and ask, "Mom, do I look like you?" She'd laugh it off. "Of course, sweetheart. You have my smile." But when I compared photos, I couldn't really see it. My skin tone was darker, my eyes a little different, my hair thicker. I thought maybe I just took after someone in the extended family. I didn't have any siblings. It was just me, Mom, and Dad. Sometimes I wished for a brother or sister, but Mom always said, "You're enough for us." I used to think that was sweet. But looking back, it sounds more like something she said to comfort herself. There were moments that stood out, small, odd moments that didn't make sense until much later. Like when we visited my grandparents on Dad's side. Grandma once looked at me and said, "You're not like the rest of us, but that's what makes you special." I laughed because I thought she meant my height or the way I talked. But Mom's face went pale, and she quickly changed the topic. Mom had a past she didn't like to talk about. Whenever I asked her about her childhood, she'd brush it off. "Mom, what were you like in high school?" I'd ask. She'd smile and say, "Oh, you know me, boring story." I'd push a little. "Come on, tell me something fun." She'd laugh again, softer this time. "Some things are better left in the past, sweetheart." I thought she was just being modest. But the way her eyes softened every time she said that, it was like she was protecting something. Or someone. Dad was different. He'd tell me about fishing trips with his own father, about the time he got caught stealing cookies, about all his little adventures. But when it came to Mom's side of the family, he stayed quiet. There were other little things. Sometimes I'd find Mom sitting at the kitchen table late at night, papers spread out in front of her. When she saw me, she'd quickly hide them. "Just bills," she'd say, smiling. But I noticed the envelopes were old, yellowed, not like regular mail. Once, I saw one with a hospital logo on it. I didn't think much of it back then. I remember another time, I was maybe 17, when Mom picked me up from basketball practice. I climbed into the car and said, "Thanks for picking me up, Mom." She smiled, "Of course, sweetheart. You're our world." Then I asked her, "Why don't we ever talk about your childhood?" She laughed, but it didn't sound real. "Oh, you know me, boring story." She turned up the radio after that, and we drove home in silence. When I got to college, things started to feel off. Mom called me more often than usual, checking where I was, who I was with. She'd ask random questions about my health, like she was worried about something specific. I brushed it off as her being protective. But there was one night when I came home for a surprise visit. I walked in and saw her on the couch with a box of old photos. When she noticed me, she jumped, slammed the lid shut, and said, "You scared me." I asked what she was looking at, and she said, "Just old memories." But her eyes were wet. Dad, meanwhile, started spending more time in the garage, fixing things that didn't need fixing. When I'd ask what he was doing, he'd just shrug. Keeping busy. I think now he was trying to keep himself from saying something. Their friends and relatives sometimes acted strange around me too. Like they wanted to say something but didn't. I remember one of Mom's friends once saying, "She's grown so much, do you ever plan to tell her?" And Mom gave her a sharp look that made the woman stop talking immediately. At the time, I didn't question it. I thought, they're just adults being weird. But as I got older, I started to feel this quiet distance between me and my parents. Like something invisible was sitting at our dinner table, unspoken but heavy. I'd see them exchange glances, share looks that ended in silence. I told myself it was normal. Families have secrets, maybe money problems, maybe old fights. But deep down, I knew this was different. And then came the moment I wasn't ready for, the day I found out something big was about to happen.